Exciting. So thank you for contributing. That can continue, of course, at the breaks or next time or over lunch. So thank you so much. The second presentation is really looking at the root causes of conflict, kind of new insights which come into Father Moon's teaching, which are definitely worth looking at and a way to grasp why things are not ideal as we would expect or hope. As we can recognize, reality is tragically very different from the kind of idealistic things we were talking about right there. And we have a world of conflict. You are also aware of this, I'm sure. In life, then, we have two purposes, essentially, and sometimes this is not fully recognized or utilized as it could be. Here's Father Moon in the 1970s. He's saying there, we have two purposes in our life. One is the purpose of our own lives, more individual purpose. The other is the purpose of our lives in relation to others, to our family, our nation, or the whole world. There must be balance, good balance and harmony between these two. If too much stress is placed on individualism, then collective virtues are lost. That is like love of the nation, brotherhood of the people, family integrity, relationships between parent and children, and finally, even the value of individuals themselves is affected. And, if there's any kind of definition, I suppose, of our current philosophy that people live by, it is probably self-centered individualism is one of the strongest, right? Unfortunately. And as much as people think in philosophical terms, maybe not, right? But that's how you might characterize it. And it's kind of accepted. It is a kind of norm for that reason. So peace, or living for the sake of others, according to the paired system that we described earlier and the ideal which we shared, means that I exist to benefit the whole and others. So I am here to live for some higher purpose than just for my own happiness. I've simply put it here. Any individual is part of the whole. As we said, we're interconnected beings. We depend on these relationships. So the individual lives for the whole. And if an individual is living with that kind of mind or has these purposes in a good balance, then the whole will support that individual and will be able to ensure that their well-being is taken care of. It's a little bit like if you seek to have and develop really meaningful relationships with 10 people, without asking, those people will surely come to help you if you're in some difficulty or some need. It's just very natural, because if you give out a lot to others, then they will want to return that without even being asked. So it's a kind of where the whole is supporting the individual and the individual supports the whole, a very healthy relationship there. But the cause of conflicts comes when there's less regard for that higher purpose. I might have in my mind that others somewhere are existing for my benefit. And this diminishes or ignores the value of the whole. It's seeing myself as a little bit separate from the whole, like this. And that is expecting the whole to support me, but not actually living so much for the sake of others, for the sake of that whole purpose. Again, quoting our founder, he said, according to the logic of communism, and he was very instrumental in developing a critique and counter-proposal to communism that took a lot of the wind out of its sails. There will be constant struggles as long as there are classes of people. In our ideology, that's UPF or principles of peace, there are no class differences, but only family relationships. Here there is no discrimination. There are no people above or below, but only the relationship between parents and children providing order in the family. So it's not a relationship of dominion, it's of dominating one against the other. But there is structure as well, which is needed, and it's a familial one, which is based on relationships of genuine love. So you would do anything for the other family member. And according to communist ideology, he sums up this way: mine is mine, and yours is mine. On our part, we must think mine is yours, and yours is the nation's, and the nation's is the world's, and the world's is God's, and God's is mine. So it's a much more kind of healthy circle, right, of give and receive action going on. And the spirit of unificationism, or the kind of philosophy generated by principles of peace, must be greater than the power of communism in practice, in hope, and in ideals. Because communism itself, the theory, is very idealistic. Right? That's why a lot of people are still attracted to it or stirred by it. But in practice, it turns out to be a very failed system and has caused so much grief. Right? I don't know if you know something of the statistics. I think the world has not woken up to it yet, really. But in the 70-year communist experiment, probably most conservative estimate is 75 million, but it could be as much as 150 million people lost their lives. And that's not wars between nations. It's just eliminating people within countries, right? Because they have a different point of view, or they are seeking freedoms which the state doesn't allow, this kind of thing. So it's a horrific death toll under this kind of experiment. And like I said, hasn't really hit home yet, I think. I mean, certain things such as the Holocaust and the loss of 6 million Jews and others at that time, still is very much in people's minds. But what about the death toll under communism? It's much larger, actually. So the reality of human nature is something like this. We have some selfish nature that can be quite well developed, but everybody has also an original nature, as we call it, which is largely undeveloped. It can be more developed. It should be our nature, just full stop. But we have these two characteristics, and it results in what we could call a conflicted self, conflicts in the self. And this is picked up in all the world's religious traditions, interestingly. So it's something that we can say is the human condition, but it's not the ideal. It's not what should be there in the beginning. Here in Sikhism, in the Adi Granth, it says, whoever proclaims himself good, no, goodness approaches him not. As soon as you start thinking you're good, then it's a little warning bell. Maybe you're not, right? The mind is twofold, the pure and also the impure. This is from Hinduism. Or Native American religion. The Mohawk tradition says every person has both a bad heart and a good heart. That's nice, isn't it? Or in Christianity, I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. So here is St. Paul himself, by Christian definition, a saved Christian, somebody who benefited from that. And nevertheless, even though I'm sure he was a very good person, he felt this difficulty inside himself, we don't know what it was. Maybe just an inability to love certain people, but he found himself restricted and battling within himself. And he wants to do good, but he finds himself doing the opposite. So that's something which is really quite universal, and you may recognize this in yourself, or you might be able to live without that kind of feeling of contradiction. I don't know. I certainly recognize it in myself, these kind of limitations. And the more that you kind of try to uncover that, the more layers that you find, something deeper that you have to change. This is the kind of journey that people go on when they're adopting a lifestyle as a monk or nun, or really, delving deep in the life of prayer to examine themselves. So there's some conflict in the mind, and I searched for the picture of the person who looked the most conflicted. And this is the person I don't know who he is. No. So, we have certain selfish thoughts and words and deeds which kind of lead us towards, we could say, an evil side, not such a good side, or actions, and tends to be when physical body and physical impulses are dominating over our mind. Our mind is not connecting with something higher, or those higher values that we talked about, right? And the body is winning that argument. But also the same person will have unselfish thoughts, and that leads into words and actions where the original mind is leading and it's going in a good direction. So it's kind of pulled both ways, and this is very much common in human beings. So there's this battle going on. In the end, it's a battle in the mind, even though we might describe it as a mind-body problem. It's a battle in the mind, and each person has this conflict. So that conflict manifests when we are at odds with other family members, or we are, there's some conflict in society or in the workplace, or even on a bigger scale between nations. It's the origin of the reason why people fight and seek to dominate each other with unrighteous goals. So this origin of conflict is something that, is searched for in religion, and people turn to that to try and get these answers with an intuitive recognition that life shouldn't be like that, right? That's a kind of something which is, again, universal. I wish it was not like that. It shouldn't be like that. We want to do things differently. And you'll find there are tales told in almost every culture and every tradition, which often in the form of myths, but they contain very deep insights. There's intuition there about the human condition, and very often it's in a kind of metaphorical story. But metaphorical, but surprisingly universal, so hinting at some deep understanding there, or hidden truth. And this is referring there, the picture, to the Judeo-Christian story, also Islamic story of the fall in the Garden of Eden for our first ancestors. So that's the kind of story that I'm talking about. But let's look at some of the quotations in world religions which indicate that something there is wrong, especially in the area of immorality, or the misuse of love, or the corruption of love, or something of a sexual nature. Here in the Uttaranga Sutram of Jainism, any Jain here today? God bless you, wonderful. I am lucky today. That's wonderful. And then, I am told, it says there in part of your scripture, it is better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden lustful pleasure. That is very strong, isn't it? But very clear. And then in the Dhammapada from Buddhism, the man who goes to the wife of another, meaning in a kind of adulterous way, digs up the very roots of life. It's so damaging, right? Digging up the roots of life. Or in the Holy Quran, do not come near adultery, for it's a shameful deed and evil, opening the road to other evils, a kind of gateway, sin, if you like. Or in Judaism, in the commentary, in the Talmud, it says there, what was the wicked serpent, that's the reference to the myth in the Genesis story, what was the wicked serpent contemplating at that time? He thought, I shall go and kill Adam and wed his wife, and I shall be king over the whole world. This is a way to dominate and take an unrighteous, superior position by, and you could say it was spiritually killing Adam and wedding his wife, having that relationship with his wife. Interesting insights there. Here in Hinduism, formerly all creatures were virtuous, and by themselves they obtained divinity. Then women who had been virtuous became wicked witches, and Brahma filled them with wanton desires, which they in turn inspired in men. He created anger, and henceforth all creatures were born in the power of desire and anger. Interesting, isn't it, right? I always think of these things as more like, how do you answer your children? Right? When your children say, why did that bad man do that, Daddy, Yeah, because children have this innocence, right? And it's a painful thing as a parent. I'm sure many of you are parents. It's very painful when your child first asks these kind of questions, and you have to say the world, isn't as good as we'd like it to be. There are bad people there. This person was killed and should never have been killed. It's terrible. It's very, very, very sad to have to deal with that, right? So cultures will make their story. Where does this come from? It's a good question, right? So we have to think of that. Or here, again, in Islam, this is, O children of Adam, let not Satan seduce you in the same manner as he got your parents out of the garden, stripping them of their clothing in order to expose their private parts. Or, again, Sikhism, sexual desire is the window, pain and pleasure are the gatekeepers, virtue and sin are the gates. And from the Christian tradition, flee from sexual immorality. This is St. Paul again. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. You're violating that temple. You're kind of corrupting yourself in that process. So it's a sin that does damage to you as well as to somebody else. And there is this story in the Genesis story. Father Moon makes a lot of this. In fact, brings out a whole typology which can be applied even to world events, past, present, and future. So, that's why I refer to this in particular. His insights were gained through long hours and even years of tearful prayer to really research many translations of biblical stories and other literature and Chinese classics, all kinds of things he looked into. And there's a story of the first ancestors in the Garden of Eden. And this is maybe known to you. Anybody not know this? Then I won't repeat it. I mean, just enough to say, the first human ancestors described as Adam and Eve are in a beautiful garden where they have everything they would want for their happiness. But there's also a prohibition, and the commandment of God says, do not eat, you can eat of the fruit of any of these trees, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, do not eat that fruit, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. A very strong warning, but they were tempted. First, Eve was tempted by the serpent figure to eat that fruit, and then she went to Adam and gave him the fruit, saying, you will enjoy this. And that was apparently the cause of all this problem and heartache, right? So metaphorical, right? Not literal. That was part of Father Moon's insight. What is the metaphor? Have a think about it, right? What could this be a metaphor for? What is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What is something that could cause such a problem and such a sow the seeds of this conflict in the mind of every individual that followed on? It's a universal problem. Okay, we will find the answer out after lunch. This is a real new technique. I think I'll use this, Margaret, right? I'll use this. This is very good. It's like the ending of EastEnders or something, you know? Tune in next week, right? Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, David, for your flexibility. That's wonderful. Food has just arrived downstairs, so please hurry and go downstairs and eat. And then we're going to try to get back here by 1:30. If or close to there. But please